All right, this is the big breaking news that we are getting in from the Indian Air Force, where in a tweet just about 3 minutes ago, they've updated that the An-32 crash, 8 members of the rescue team have reached the crash site today morning. The Indian Air Force is sad to inform that there are no survivors on that crash. And Vishnu Som is on with us. Vishnu, take us through what the Air Force is saying.
Well, the Indian Air Force has now come up with this update on the An-32 crash. They say, and I'm reading out their tweets now, 8 members of the rescue team have reached the crash site today morning. The Indian Air Force is sad to inform that there are no survivors from the crash of the An-32. The following air warriors lost their lives in the tragic An-32 crash: Wing Commander G.M. Charles, Squadron Leader H. Vinod, Flight Lieutenant R. Thapa, Flight Lieutenant A. Tawad, Flight Lieutenant S. Mohanty, Flight Lieutenant N.K. Garg, K.K. Mishra, then there is Sergeant Anup Kumar, Corporal Sherin, then there is S.K. Singh, Pankaj, Putali, and Rajesh Kumar. The Indian Air Force pays tribute to the brave air warriors who lost their lives during the An-32 crash on the 3rd of June 2019, stands by with the families of the victims. May their souls rest in peace. So that's the very sad news that we now have, confirming what seemed to be almost inevitable, that there would be no survivors from this horrific crash. The An-32 slammed onto the face of a mountain. It had taken off on the 3rd of June at 12:25 in the afternoon from Jorhat in Assam. It was on a flight to the air landing ground in Mechuka in Arunachal Pradeshe. It went off radar scopes at about 1:07 p.m. on that day, and for more than a week it went missing. When finally, day before yesterday, teams were able to detect it from the air. Teams have now reached the ground, and they are now confirming on the basis of physical examination of the debris that there are no survivors. There were 13 Indian Air Force personnel on board. 5 of them were the cockpit crew and the engineer as well. But the others, I believe, were involved in some sort of training missions. This is in a sense, the worst, the beginning of the process, hopefully, of closure for the families who have been waiting anxiously for so many days, trying to figure out what exactly has gone wrong. We were hoping against hope that there would be some survivors, but sadly, the news from the Indian Air Force at this stage, and something that they've tweeted out now officially, is that there are no survivors. The Indian Air Force stands by the families who have lost so much. Many of these families have been in Jorhat for the last several days waiting for some sort of news. But the biggest mystery was what happened to the aircraft. And then after the jacket was spotted, obviously, there was always this hope that someone or a few people may have survived the crash. Unfortunately, we can now confirm that there are no survivors. Sona.
No survivors there. Sad news there coming in from the Indian Air Force. We also have Ratnadeep with us on the phone line. Ratnadeep, so Indian Air Force has now confirmed what the families had feared for all this while. You spoke, when we spoke earlier, you talked about how the families were all stationed at the Jorhat Air Base in hope to hear some news. Do we know what happens next now?
That's right, Sonal. In fact, very unfortunate news for the family. They have been anxiously waiting all these days ever since this accident took place on the 3rd of June. But now Indian Air Force has officially confirmed that there are no survivors. We haven't been able to speak to any of the families after this news broke. But we had spoken to the families, and they were hoping against hope. And it seems that this time people who were involved in this accident were not lucky. Now what happens next is not very clear, but the SOP that was shared to us is that there were two emergency teams which were stationed in Kayeng and Alo, along with doctors. The doctors were there and medics were there in both the teams. So in all likelihood, the choppers will now bring the mortal remains to either Kayeng or Alo, where the medical examinations, further medical examinations will be done, and would be further, brought to the An-32 base at Jorhat. So the theater of action now would be Jorhat, the base of the An-32, and this was a place from where they actually took off on 3rd of June, and this was a routine sortie, but they it turned out to be a very unfortunate one with this accident. And what we are hearing from Arunachal Pradesh government is that they have moved in a lot of logistics as well through road, and that would be brought tracked. They will track those logistics up in the hills. Remember, it's not only about recovering the mortal remains, but also the recovery of the crucial black box, the cockpit voice recorder, and the data recorder, as well as the other debris.
I wanted to understand from you that I know it's a little early and we've just got a confirmation from the Indian Air Force, but do we know if the mortal remains of all the 13 have been found and the process in which they will now be brought back, if at all?
That's right, Sonal. In fact, what we know is that there is no survivors. Now, what is actually happening at ground zero is not very clear, but the SOP that was formulated when they started this rescue operation is that if they find survivors, they would rush in. This emergency teams will rush in. They will be airlifted and brought to the base hospital. If they don't find, then the priority would be first to collect the mortal remains and send it back to the base. So that's the SOP. But what is really happening at ground zero, it's unclear, because this is also an area, remember, which does not have any sort of network. So whatever information is coming from the accident site is through Indian Air Force.
Right.
So right at this moment, no clear word in terms of what is happening next, but this was the SOP which was decided before. So in all likelihood, they would follow this.
All right, we wait for more details on this. This is just the few tweets that we've got as a confirmation from the Indian Air Force. The worst nightmare and the worst fears of the families have come true. There are no survivors, after all, of those 13 people who were on board that An-32 aircraft, which went missing. Just the day before, we found the first pictures of the wreckage of that aircraft. And now, after having trekked all the way to the spot, the Air Force has found that there are no survivors.